Welcome to Faith for the Apocalypse. My name is Nick, and this channel is a space for us to talk about faith, politics, and whatever else we want, which will usually be a good amount of history and science fiction. This video is a part of our Devo video series. This is the first video for the month of February. If you are interested in getting daily or weekly emails with our Devo printouts, you can find more information and sign up at the link below. If you're not interested in the emails, that's totally fine. We're still really glad that you are here with us today. Now, I'm not sure how you're feeling, but I can guess that you might be feeling somewhat similar to me because this week has been a lot. Like, so much more than I anticipated. I knew when Trump got elected that things were going to be bad. I knew that we were going to be taking a step towards the fascist, but I don't think I realized just how intense his kind of shock and awe campaign of executive orders was going to be. I'm trying to get through my day, trying to make sure that I'm doing my day job. And I find myself having to keep one eye on the news as there's 5, 10, 15 stories each day that all feel urgent and pressing and upsetting and all seem to require a response of me. And I just want to pause and point out that systems of oppression want us feeling that way. That's the point of kind of this floodgate of decisions and actions, is to kind of get us all to a place where we are overwhelmed and unbalanced and are unable to respond. One of the ways that we can ensure that we are ready to stay engaged for the long haul is to make sure that we aren't only getting obsessed and hyper focused with the most ultra up to the minute news, right? Rather than focusing on everything all at once, it can be really helpful for us to kind of zoom in on one particular issue that we care about, that we can engage in, and then that we can kind of carry forward into some kind of action. So, just for this month of February, I want to take a little bit of a pause, a little bit of a step back. We're still going to talk about the news and the political situation and what's going on in the world around us. But I also want to kind of revisit my original plan when I was imagining this channel and spend kind of the whole month of February really deeply, theologically, and historically thinking about race in the United States. What are the concepts? What are the history? What are our current struggles when it comes to kind of the racial understanding of the populace, as well as how our systems treat people, especially Black people, differently than other racial groups? So, every February in the United States is Black History Month. And I know what you're thinking. You're asking yourself, why is it that we've selected the shortest month of the year for Black History Month? Is it because we haven't valued Black history and we don't want to give it enough time? That's not actually the case. There is a reason behind it. Historian Carter G. Wilson picked February as Black History Month because both Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, two important anti slavery figures, had birthdays in the second week of February. So he was the first person to suggest that we celebrate Black history during that particular month. This wasn't made a national holiday until 1967, when President Ford declared that every February would be Black History Month. Now, in theory, Black History Month is great. It is important that we shine a spotlight on a corner of our history that has been largely ignored for a really long time, right? For a long time, history was just the history of white people. So it's important that we have a month where we pay attention to other populations. However, sometimes we end up relegating any conversation about race, about Black culture, about Black history, about Black theology just into February. We segregate out our learnings, our understandings, our thinking, when in reality, we need to be incorporating Black perspectives into everything, right? Black culture is culture, Black history is history, Black theology is theology. And on this channel, we're not going to just kind of segregate out talking about these things into one month. We're going to kind of pull them with us through the whole year. But I do think that it is important, especially in this moment in history, that we take some time to be really intentional in our self conceptions, in our understandings, in our activities around race and things related to race. Because you see, as we kind of all are coming together in our shared frustration, sometimes we forget that we didn't have it perfect before Trump, right? There are areas of injustice and inequity that we had allowed to continue that had maybe like seeped into us and we were furthering them along. And as we enter this kind of new age of organizing and working together, it's really important that we continue to work on ourselves to become more equitable and more just in our perspectives of everything. And one way we do that, especially for those of us who are white, is by paying more attention to our own concepts and behaviors around race. I'm going to give you an example of why this is really important. I've seen several posts from Black organizers in the last month that are expressing frustration or tiredness that is experienced by them personally and others in their community and racial groups because of a long history of injustice. And unfortunately, on more than one of those posts, the first response was from a white person who speaks for or identifies with a different minoritized group who wanted to make adjustments to the post to ensure that their own perspectives were included. These are moments where individuals might have been seeking camaraderie and connection, and because of their privilege, unintentionally changed the whole conversation. A post that was about race and people of a certain race now has to become about all of us because a person of my race tone had decided that that's what the post was going to be about. I don't think any of those people were trying to be racist. I think rather we act out of privilege and misinformation. So, as we move forward, this month is dedicated to helping us learn better so that we can do better as we work in multiracial and diverse coalitions working towards change. So, this week, we're going to first dig in by talking a little bit about how Black theology can guide us in this moment looking forward as we explore a basic introduction to the concepts and ideas that are a part of liberation theology. Originating in South American Catholicism and the US Black Church at about the same time, liberation theology is a theological movement that interprets scripture through the lens of those who are most marginalized or ostracized in our societies. This is the idea that ultimately leads to the preferential treatment for the poor in Catholic theology. But in the US Black Church, Dr. James Cone kind of kicks off liberation theology in 1970 when he publishes A Black Theology of Liberation. In this work, James Cone reminds us that our God is a God of the oppressed, that our Jesus is a suffering Christ who suffers alongside those who suffer in the worldly context in which we live. As Christians, we are called not only to address our kind of personal belief systems, but we are called to engage with those systems and structures in our world that are leading to suffering. Our call as Christians is to limit, address, and heal the suffering that is happening in the world around us. Liberation theology supports a socially and politically engaged faith as a kind of resistance and movement away from American Christianity at the time that especially focused on issues of internal piety or ritual purity instead of focusing on the injustices that were faced by those in our world, especially by Black Americans. Cone's A Black Theology of Liberation is a delightfully angry text. You can tell that it was written in 1970. You can tell that he wrote it in a short amount of time, that he kind of sat down and just got out all that was kind of heavy on his heart from what he was experiencing and seeing in the community around him. For Cone, white Christianity has created a false God and is an idolizing idolatry kind of thing where we are idolizing a form of Christianity that is not biblical, but rather a form of Christianity that supports current racial, economic, and political systems. Next week, we are going to do a really deep dive into American Christianity and how it has influenced our conceptions of race and relationships between different racial groups throughout history. But Cone at this point is seeing the failure of mainstream white Christianity to address the reality of Black individuals. This focus on work on your piety and be happy with paradise in the by and by doesn't actually seem biblical. He kind of leans into the rhetoric and talks about how white kind of stands with evilness, whereas black stands with God, because God is on the margins. And in our society, white is in the center and black is on the margins. So if our God is a God of justice, then our God is with the people who are experiencing injustice. And this is incredibly biblical, right? Cone and the trajectory of Black liberation theology pulls on the Exodus narrative and then connects the freedom of the Israelites from bondage in Israel to Jesus's death and resurrection and freedom that he offers, not in the time to come, but in the here and now, as we continue to push to create the kingdom of God, where we are creating a more just, loving, and equitable world. That is still the project of liberation theology. It is a biblical movement that points out our God's orientation towards the least of these, that calls us to likewise orient our whole selves and our whole faith amongst understanding, addressing, being with, and healing those who are experiencing pain and suffering on the margins of our society. Cone talks about how Jesus is black because Jesus is with the suffering, and in his current context, Jesus is black. Queer theologians have taken up this idea and will talk about Jesus is trans. If Jesus is that person who is most marginalized, then Jesus may be an undocumented trans person of color. And this framework is incredibly helpful for us, right? Because as humans, we tend to assume everything as it filters through our own understandings, our own experience. Everyone else is like me. When I think of a generic person, I think of myself. And the problem is, I often will think of God as being like me instead of asking, where is God in the world around me? For white folks who are participating in the project of liberation theology, this is a project of decentering ourselves and our own experiences and expectations so that we may listen to those on the margins where Jesus is, so we can hear where we are being called forth. So, how do we take this idea of a liberating God and incorporate that into our faith lives and our everyday engagement in the world around us? I think one thing that liberation theology kind of gives us is this idea that our political and social engagement, our resistance to oppressive systems, and our care for those who are suffering under them are a part of our spiritual discipline. They are not charity or mission work that's over there on the side, but they are central to our experience of our God and our acting out of our faith. We are clearly living in a time where the message of Christianity is being corrupted, right? The vice president is talking about how God tells you to love yourself and your family and your clan first before worrying about everything else. We know that's Christian nationalism. That's a particular evangelical American perspective. That's not something that's biblical. But how do we resist the fact that some dominant voices in Christianity have moved towards this very selfish, very capitalist, consumerist perspective? And one way we respond is by reacquainting ourselves with the radical call of our Jesus that has been outlined by theologians and individuals in Black and other minority churches for a very, very long time. We can choose to begin to incorporate our engagement and our response to these systems as our spiritual practice in order for it to be something that we do every day, not because it makes us feel good, but because it's the right thing to do and because it's the way that we find God. So this week in our Devos, we are going to read more of Cone and think about our God as a God of the oppressed. We will hear some prayers from Black theologians that can help lead us forward in our current moment of chaos. And we'll have two different devotions where we can reflect on how our political engagement and our economic activities can become a part of our spiritual discipline and our expression of our faith and our love for our neighbor. That's all I have for today. I hope you are taking care of yourself, and I hope that you'll take some time today to step back and maybe listen to other people's voices. Find a voice from a community that you haven't paid very much attention to in the past, and maybe hear what they say about what's currently going on. I hope that you are ready to grow and expand and learn, because connecting with others is the best way to do that. Thank you so much for being here, and we hope to see you again later this week.